Okay, hello everybody. You're starting to come on, so welcome. We're very glad you're here. If you want, you can go over to the chat box and just let us know where everyone is from. It's always nice to know who we're talking to and where everyone's from. Very happy to have you here tonight. So thank you for joining us. New York. Okay. Marion is from New York too. Colorado, Houston, Oregon, Houston, Virginia, Florida, Virginia. Oh, lots of Virginias. Another Texas, Austin. Oh, Las Vegas, Indiana. Oh, you all are from everywhere. Wisconsin, Dallas. Oh my goodness. Alabama, Ohio, North Carolina. Wow. Indiana, Chicago. Great. Thank you. Welcome everybody. Vancouver. We've got someone from Vancouver. Well, we're so happy that you're here tonight. And I don't know if you heard our presentation part 1. It was last week at the same time. If you didn't see it and you would like to watch it, you can go to testingmom.com/classes, and it is up there and you can watch it if you didn't have a chance to watch part 1. And tonight I want to introduce you to just a very, very special person who is pretty much the smartest person I know, Dr. Marion Blank. She has spent over 40 years studying how children learn to read, and she is also an expert on children with autism spectrum disorder and language. And in fact, that is what we're going to be talking about tonight. She's on the faculty at Columbia University, where she developed and ran the Light on Learning program. She has a PhD in medical psychology from the University of Cambridge in England. She's lectured all over the globe. She is the person who developed Reading Kingdom. She wrote Reading Remedy. In fact, let me open up, let me share my screen so I can show you some of the books that she has written, including one that I know you'll want to read, which is Spectacular Bond, which is a book on reaching children with autism. And she's also written these other books, ASD Unlocking Language, Speaking Sounds, and Basic Math. And she is our esteemed expert tonight. And we're just very lucky to have her with us here tonight. And by the way, if you would like to watch this webinar later again, or get a copy of the slides that we have on tonight's webinar tomorrow, you can go to testingmom.com/classes and you'll be able to view this workshop online. So welcome, Marion. Thank you for being here tonight.
That's a pleasure.
All right. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So as the title of our webinar indicates, tonight we're going to be focusing on language. And before I really ask you to get into your approach on language, I wanted to ask you if you could talk a little bit about some of the different interventions for children on the autism spectrum disorder when it comes to language. If you could give us a little bit of information on that.
Okay, sure, I'll try. I want to mention that we're going to be covering a lot of concepts tonight, but the idea is parents and everybody else who's viewing, it isn't that you have to master these. What I'm trying to do is give you a framework for judging what programs are offering and what language, how to teach language, because it has unfortunately been a very neglected area. One of the dominant forces in this, as parents will know, is ABA teaching, which is based on it's mass trials. It's ideally hours a day. The original work was 8 hours a day, and so the child's in very intense situation of having to answer a lot of questions and do a lot of activities. And there is, however, no real framework for what the language is that the children are asked. overall, there's a tendency or pattern of using the language that appears in nursery schools and in preschools. So there's a lot of work on size and shape and color and identifying objects, things of that sort. In general, it has been shown over the years that this does not generalize, and there are good reasons for it not to generalize. Because it's very specific, so it's very hard for the child to see how it applies in daily life. So the outcomes, language-wise, have not been very good. Then, on the other hand, there are more what are called child-centered programs. Largely, there was a feeling against ABA-type work as being too robotic, too mechanical. And there are a number of programs in that. There's one of the famous ones, or the very well-known, is the Denver model. And another is Floor Time, the Greenspan model. And they use the idea that once the child is able to relate to the adult, the language will come naturally, as it does with children who are neurotypical. And so it's based on, the key is to get a kind of play type relationship going with the adult, and then you don't have to worry about the language is going to emerge. In my experience, that is almost never the case. The children, even though language is no longer a key criteria for autism, the children have serious language problems. And so it's sort of a co-occurring condition. And what I'm going to try and outline today is an approach of what you should be doing to look at language carefully and see what you can achieve.
Okay. Well, I know that your view of how language should be taught is different from what you just described, and I wondered if you could cover some of the principles that govern your teaching.
Well, we're going to be doing this throughout the hour, but for example, I'll start with one key factor. Many programs that teach language just start with language. They said the child isn't using language well, let's go into language. So they'll start with what color is this, what size is this, show me the big one, things of that sort. But what has been given almost no consideration is the fact that language requires a lot of pre-language skills in order for the language to emerge. For example, this is an aside, which is kind of interesting. It's been found that deaf children learn language, sign language, earlier than hearing children speak language. And that the reason is because the motor patterns required for the initial gestures are easier than the motor patterns required for speech. So in other words, what we have is certain motor skills have to be present for language. And what I've done is put together a series of activities that are necessary and hopefully lay the base for language. For example, if a child doesn't have memory for sequences, there is no way they're going to learn language. Because if you have a sentence like, here are some kids, something simple. If a child only has attention to one element at a time, he's not going to see that as connected. And by the time he gets to the words kids, he's going to forget the words here are some. This has been given very little attention. And it is, I think, key to successful language teaching. So we have a series of activities. These are available for children who do not have spoken language. They're available in the pre-language curriculum, which is available on ASD Reading. For those who have language, it's in the beginning of unlocking language. In other words, this is how we start. So we start with a series where we constantly building up to sequences of 4. So the children have to match pictures, they have to sequence body movements. For example, even doing something like touch, we don't use any words, but touch your head and your neck. Then we have sequencing of visual patterns where the children get a sequence of colors and they have to reproduce it. And we also build in receptive language so that we start with simple commands, like, for example, give me the car, and we build up so that they get a set of effectively 4 commands, where it might be, give me the car is really 2. It's a verb, give, and it's car. So you'd have a different action if you have something like turn over the car. Then you have a different verb and the car. And we eventually get the children to do things like, well, turn over the bus and hug the girl, so that the child is building up a sequence. Now, this could be, all these activities can be done with children who don't speak. So it develops their attention and it develops some of their language skills. And that's one of the first major steps. And then as we go into the language material, well, can I have the slide on the three parts, the three types of language?
Sure.
Karen? Yeah. One of the really interesting and almost never noted features of language is that there are only three ways in which language can be expressed. There are millions of ideas, but there are only three ways. You can either have a command, like go to the door, give me the shoe, and it could be complicated. It could be touch the ball that is on the top shelf of the whatever. So you have commands. And that's why I gave some simple examples and some more complex ones. Give me the girl versus take the one who is standing and put her in the box on the table. Then you have statements, which are comments, like here is a girl, and the girl was hoping to be here, but the bad weather made her change her plans. So these can be, I'm not saying this is the type of sentence for the child, but the point is you have statements where you're giving information. And then third, you have questions, which are like, who is this? Or the more complex one, where did the girl go after she left the restaurant? Now, those three are the ways you teach. This is all a teacher can do. This is all anyone can do. So what we have done is in the pre-language, we've already gotten the children used to commands and to handle more and more commands. So that's established. Now, what's the next step? In most programs that actively try to teach language, they go directly into questions. But if a child does not understand statements like the girl is standing, they're not going to be able to answer questions like, what is the girl doing? So you've got to get the child to handle statements, which is a very big demand for many children on the spectrum. Now, the interesting thing is that they don't tend to speak extensively. Many children on the spectrum who do speak are said to use 1- and 2-word utterances. How do we get beyond it? So what I use is a very simple but underused technique, which is sentence imitation. And so if you say a girl, the child has to say a girl. And if you start saying something like, the girl is not standing, they have to say the girl is not standing, and there has to be the right material with it. So that what we're getting is the children to produce longer and longer sentences. And this always amazes parents, when they're up to 8 to 10 word imitations, and parents say, when is my child ever going to be using 8 to 10 word imitations? We do it very systematically, but when they can imitate 8 to 10 word sentences, they can then answer questions where your question is, let's say, 4 or 5 words, and the answer is 4 or 5 words. And so the question might be, where is the girl? The answer will be, here is the girl. And what we have as a technique is that all the words that can be carried down from the question are carried into the answer. Normally, that's done implicitly. Like if you say, what would you like to eat? You could say a sandwich. But in my system, it would be, I would like to eat a sandwich. And this gives the kids a very clear roadmap as to how to answer different questions. So I think it'll be helpful. We'll come back to this. Let's show some clips of Diane, who's on the website. You can see her. That we,
Yes.
Let's start with the first clip, which
Right.
that's a later clip.
Right.
Can you
Get to the beginning.
We'll go through all of these.
Right.
Okay. Here she is at the start of the program.
Diane, look at mommy. Look at mommy.
She would ignore adults.
Diane, pretty girl. Diane, look at mommy. Say bye-bye to the camera. Bye-bye, camera. Bye-bye, camera. Man. Pay attention to me. Diane, look at mommy. Diane, look at mommy.
Can we get to the next clip, Karen?
Sure. Okay, just one second. Let me get to the right place.
Oh, this is, we didn't show, I just stop it for a second.
Yeah, was there something before that?
Yeah, there was something before
Okay,
that, but maybe
hold on. Let
it's
me
when
get
she's crying.
Here, hold on.
Yeah, here it is. This was, if you left her alone, she would ignore you. If you tried to engage her, she would just cry. And that's a behavior I'm sure many parents are familiar with. So I won't go into the behavioral program now. We're going to do that in 2 sessions later. But now is once we have her willing to follow an adult, this is one of the early lessons that she's getting. And all she's doing here is matching some objects, but you'll see.
All you need is that to be memory.
Mm-hmm.
And I was talking to the parents. Okay. And it was one of the early activity. Now here's something in the receptive language. You'll get a sense of what that is.
Diane, turn over the hat and the shell. Good. Good, Diane. Diane, shake the board. Shake the board. Good.
Now here is the first level of imitation.
A car.
A car.
Car is going.
Car is going.
Car is not going.
Did not go.
Car is not going.
Car is not going.
Good. Diane. Car was here.
Tiger was here.
Car was here.
Car was here.
Good, Diane. Some dogs.
Some dogs.
Dogs
Can
can.
move on now, Karen.
Okay. And the next one is a little farther along. Let me find
Yeah.
it.
I just want to show you as she's now, this is now the spontaneous language. She's 8 years of age.
There we go. Here we are. Diane's painting a sky. Christina's got red paint. She's making something red. Painting the girl. She's painting the girl. It's beautiful.
We'll see.
Okay.
I'm making a blue sky.
Love
She's
it.
saying, I'm making a blue sky.
Okay. And then we're going to move to.
And here she is as a teenager, and she's discussing, this is a kind of relaxed conversation with her mother.
Is this your hair book that you were hoping I could find? Yes. So let's have our water and then. So tomorrow, today's haircut, well, hairdo is half ponytail with a bow. Yeah. Tomorrow,
I'm gonna do framing braids.
framing braids.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not quite sure what that is.
How much you look on this book?
Okay, show me.
Here's what you
She's
do.
showing her mother the book to show her what she wants for her hairstyle.
Yeah. Make a side part and French braid a section of hair across your crown and down the side. Make a regular braid on the other side of your face.
All right, so which side do you want the crown, the French braid?
Here.
So just like that girl?
Yes.
So I'll make a French braid down here,
And the other one goes here.
a regular.
Yeah.
All right, so I have to practice making French braid. Can we do that later, maybe?
Okay, we can go back now to the,
Okay.
Um,
Let me.
and
Hold on. All right. So, hold on one
to go back to the list of language demands, if you can do it.
You mean
You know,
this-
not this one, the other. Yeah. Now, by the way, it was these are old videos, as you can see, it's a lot of years. And it's, if you want to see them a bit more clearly, just go to the videos on the ASD reading site, and you can take all your time and see the full range of the videos. There was a question, I'll answer it now. Was she homeschooled? No, she went to school. What we found is that if you teach the language effectively, it transfers very well to the school setting. You saw her reading as well, and next session we'll be discussing reading. It's an invaluable skill to learn. But let's go back here just to give you an idea. So what happens is, if the child is speaking able to imitate 2 words, we can start the language part. And so we start with, you saw like simple noun verb sentences like car is going. And then we expanded it into longer ones, so that, for example, at level 7, by the way, everything that we have, we keep and introduce the new form with it, so that the child never has to forget what's going on. It's just that the repertoire keeps expanding. I also wanted to make a comment. I got several questions last time about how do you help the children become flexible and willing to accept change. And we build that into the program. So for example, on the 4 pre-language activities that I showed you, we vary them from one session to the next. In other words, one day you might start with matching pictures, the second, and you do A, B, C, D. Another time you might be doing D, B, A, C. Another time you might just leave out one of them. And what we do is give a fairly confined set of material, pretty interesting, pretty well organized, but we vary its presentation. So the more you vary it, you get the child more and more willing to accept change. And then let's go back. And so now just to show you what happens if you start analyzing language, almost all teaching that I've seen for children with autism is based on the present. What is this? It's a car. What color is the triangle? Red. But language is not to discuss the present. Language is really to discuss the non-present. If somebody comes in and says, oh, a chair, oh, a table, oh, some crayons, you know that they're not using language appropriately. Language is to discuss anything that comes up. So among the first ways that we help the children move beyond that is to introduce the past. So that while they're imitating, for example, you might have a little boy standing, you say the boy is standing, they say that. You take him away and you say the boy was standing. They're not totally learning it yet, but you're introducing them to very important concepts. Now you can see that a huge part of the language involves good sentence structure. Good sentence structure has been very ignored in the teaching of children with autism. And to get good sentence structure, in linguistics, there have been big battles, but it is accepted that you must have a good noun-verb system in order to use sentences. And very little work goes on in the training in most programs for verbs. In the program I've developed in Unlocking Language, it's a major part of the work. And then one of the interesting things is, if you're going to do verbs, you're also going to start using animate subjects. You're not going to be using, for example, squares and triangles. They don't do much. They don't lend themselves to verbs. But if you have little figures like frogs and turtles and little children and large adults and so on, all dolls, you've got the ability to talk about it. The girl is sitting, the boy was standing, the frog is sleeping, and then you can do, go into the past, and you can do plurals, like here are some frogs, they are eating, and so on and so forth. So what we do is once we get the children up to, I said, here it's 12, level 12, they're using 12-word sentences, usually by combining two sentences that they know. Something like, so for example, the girls are standing, but the boy is sitting. And once they have that, we can go into questions. And the questions are very carefully organized to allow the children to see the connection between questions and answers. One of the problems facing many children with autism is they don't know what to give as an answer, and they turn to saying nouns and nouns and nouns. So that you say, what is the boy doing? They say, boy. And you say, no, 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 what is the boy doing? They say, blue, because the boy is wearing a blue shirt, but they have no idea of what the question means. So here, what I've done, as I said, we set it up so that every question that we use can have keywords drop down from the question that determine the answer. So a question like, what is the boy doing, gets a different answer from what was the boy doing. And all of this is systematically built in. And once you can get the children discussing past and future and negation, like which one is not a boy, which we very carefully teach, you have the child able to understand a lot of the language that they hear about them, the language surrounding them. And so what happens is they begin to listen, and you do get generalization based on the fact that the child is now more comfortable with language. I'll give you one example, which is really interesting. I was so excited. This was many years ago. It's one of the first children I was working with, and he was bathing a doll, and I just walked in when he was doing it, and I said, what are you doing? And he said to me, I am, and he didn't have a word for washing. So he stopped and he says, I am soaping the doll, which is fantastic because he knew how to create a verb, which is exactly what we want. We want to teach them the skills that allow them to unlock language. And so that's the way we do it. Now, I'll just mention one other thing. We always use, for a long time, the third person, because you can carry down that person in the answer. So if you say, what is the girl doing? It can be the girl is. But if you're using what's called first and second person, like you and I, it changes. What are you doing? I am so-and-so. I am sitting, whatever. And so what we do is teach that as an exception, and it's late in the program. We don't do you and I until the child has a good foundation, and then he can accept that as a kind of unusual quirk in this. So to the degree that we can, every detail of what might block the child from moving ahead, we thought about and tried to control and help them over it. And what you get is remarkably good language development. It's very exciting to see.
Wow. I want to ask you, I know that you talk a lot about initiator and responder in your work on developing language. Can you explain how this fits into the teaching that you do?
Sure. This is not discussed enough. It's another key dimension of communication that we tend not to pay much attention to. Now, it's very common knowledge that children with autism have trouble initiating. Even when they're pretty well functioning, people will say they have a hard time with the conversation. They don't know what to say. And even though people claim they can teach initiation, you can't. You can't make someone an initiator. It's an oxymoron. If you're making them an initiator, you're the initiator. What you can do, fortunately, is teach responding. In other words, you're guiding the child. So you're leading the conversation and you're teaching him how to respond. In general, they don't think about it much, but we don't value responding. We sort of value the child who speaks up and so on. But being an effective responder is an enormously valuable skill. First of all, one of the interesting things, and I'll bring this up next week, is you cannot be a reader without being a responder. A reader, in a reading situation, the writer is the initiator. He's giving you or she's giving you the ideas, and the child has to follow along. The child is responding. So teaching a child to be an effective responder is enormously powerful, and it is key to success in school. If you're a good responder, follow what the teacher is suggesting you do, and you do it, you've got a very good chance of being mainstream. And if a child can be mainstream, he has access to so many of the tools and opportunities in the society. So initiator responder is a very key dimension. Now, I will mention that when the child becomes a good responder, they do improve in their initiation, but they don't become fluent initiators. They improve because they now know what language is about, and they're more willing to speak up, as you saw in that last tape with Diane, where she was talking about the hairstyle she wanted and so on. So that's my comment about that.
Okay. And many kids on the spectrum are termed a nonverbal. What exactly does that mean, and what can you do for children who fit into this category?
That's really important because no one knows the figures. It's estimated, and it's a rough, because they don't do good population studies. It's estimated that between 25 and 50% of children with autism are essentially nonverbal, meaning they don't speak, or they speak very limited, a few words, or a few functional terms like go bathroom or something of that sort. And so what happens is these children are thought not to have language. That is absolutely and completely wrong. They can have enormous amounts of language. The way I teach them language, and we'll do more on this next week, is through reading, because you can teach everything about language through reading and writing, just as you can do it with speaking. And so the reason I put nonverbal in quotes is the children are not nonverbal. They don't speak. It would be much more accurate to say non-speaking. And we have tremendous success in getting the children who are non-speaking to develop language. Now, one of the nice benefits also is that when the children's, if you start with reading for these children, many of them transfer and also start speaking. But some have too many motor problems and they don't speak. But without speaking, they can still have enormous language.
Do we have time to do speaking sound?
Yeah, I would. Okay, I would do it. Now, this is important. Again, you can go to ASD Reading to look at it and see it in detail. But what happens is if a child is non-speaking, but has two skills, we can teach him to speak. One skill is he's got to have the ability to spontaneously say 5 or 6 phonemes. Phoneme is a speech sound. So if he says things like me, or go, or up, or ought, or whatever, so he needs 5 or 6 speech sounds, and he's got to be willing to imitate them willingly 4 or 5 times. So if you, because now he's got to be a responder to your lead. So if you say to him, say, go, go, and he goes, go, go. And you say, now say up, and he says up. So if he does 4 or 5 trials like that, I can almost guarantee that we can teach him to speak, because number one, he's got the sounds of language, and number two, he's got the cooperation of being a responder. And so we'll just show a little bit of the Speaking Sounds program, which teaches the children how to get into the language of speaking.
Many children cannot speak because they cannot produce the sequences of sounds that speaking requires, but they can be taught to do so. This program systematically builds up the necessary skills by starting with single sounds and steadily moving up to the point where the child can produce 4 sounds in sequence. With the mastery of sequences up to 4, the program then advances into real words. Begin the program using sounds that the child can already make. The focus is on building sequences and patterns with these sounds. Then, new sounds can be introduced, and the child can advance to a wide range of real words, starting with simple words that involve a consonant, vowel, consonant, such as kid. To begin this program, the child must
Just move into the child, Karen.
if the child is not with
Let me just, all right, right.
Me. See. Look. See. See. Say E. E. See. Good.
the colored objects are used as a visual support. Put out a new block or set of blocks for each trial. Any color can be paired with any sound. Every trial should be performed first with a visual support and then without it. Later in this video, you will see
You can
examples
move ahead now again.
to your view. The adult and child are positioned comfortably next to each other. In addition, voice, whispering is not permitted. And the tapping of objects should be from left to right from the child's perspective.
Okay, go for
The
it.
program has 4 levels.
Do you have the
Level
next?
2, the child
Oh,
imitates up to
Let's
3
see this and then we can stop.
time in sequence. In level 3, this increases to 3 speech sounds. And in level 4, the child imitates up to 4 sounds in sequence. At each level, simpler items from previous levels are also maintained. Next, you will see an example of items from level 4 of the program.
Up, up. No, no.
Up, up, no, no.
Again.
Up, up, no, no.
That's fine.
As you
Okay. Now, I just want to, you can stop it now, Karen. What this also illustrates, look how hard the child has to work. So first of all, our programs are designed to be quite short in time. The maximum, basically, a child works in a day is an hour. 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there. This program, for example, takes about 10 minutes. Because they're really working hard. But if you don't give them a rest from that, they're going to be exhausted. So, and now you can see how important it is that he's a responder. He's a willing and able responder. And if that skill is in place, you can teach so much. And he's really working hard at it. And so with much less effort than is usually done, but with very carefully prepared materials, you can really help the child move enormously ahead. Okay, so that's it. I think we can take questions now.
We can do our questions. So let me ask you some of the questions that have been asked, and we are going to focus on language questions since that's the topic today. I don't know what they all, if any, are beyond.
Karen, I'm having trouble hearing you. Is that?
Oh, you are?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
It's okay, not great, but it's better.
Oh, sorry. Okay, I'll try to talk louder. Okay, so one question is, what do you think about teaching sign language for ASD kids?
It's an excellent question. This has not been, because people have not really looked at language as a complete system. They have used signs very often as just individual scattered signs. And like individual scattered words, it's not much help. If you're going to teach sign language as a complete language, which is how you should do it with deaf children, then it could be fine, except there's another problem. Most of the children who can't speak also cannot produce good gestures because it's the same motor skills, almost the same, that are required. And I have not seen careful evaluations of this. In other words, if a child, you've got to really look at the child's fine motor skills and see if he can produce the gestures needed for sign language. And if they can't, they're not going to be any better off with signing than with speaking.
Okay. To get your child in a program like this one, where would you go to get to?
Well, everything's available online. That's been my goal. I do consultations, and people can write to the ASD reading site and get consultations. Very often the consultations are involved really at the beginning. sort of helping the parents set up the program, helping them coordinate with the school, helping the hardest, all the parents, and we'll do this in the fourth session, is changing the behavioral patterns, because that's the hardest to change your everyday behavior. But everything else is, and that's been my goal, is to make it available to people through computer programs or through paper and pencil manuals. So basically, once the parent has set things up, everything is outlined and programmed. The term is manualized. It's all been manualized.
So they can go to ASD Unlocking Language and
They go to ASD Reading and then buy Unlocking Language, get the math program, get the speaking sounds program. There's also a PDF on ASD Reading, which tells you which programs to use, one after the other, based on your child's skills and the time available. For example, we have a very nice program for teaching music. But I'll say to the parents, don't push yourself and do it if you're already overburdened with a lot of other demands. So you've got to sort of prioritize. My priority is always to develop good behavior and then language, spoken language and written, because that has the biggest payoff in every possible way. If there's then additional time, you can do the math program, you can do the music program. So it's really a decision for the family to make.
So ASDlanguage.com?
No, it's ASDreading.com.
Sorry, I want to make sure I get that right. Reading.com. So
Yeah,
that's
and that has all the programs.
okay, good. Okay.
But it has also the main software program, which teaches reading. So there's a software program for teaching reading.
Okay, so one question, when someone saw Diane, he said amazing progress, but do I assume that she was or has she always been a high functioning child? What about children with severe ASD?
She had severe ASD at the start. We showed just a tiny clip. Her behavior at the start was, she had a pattern, which is one pattern that you find. When she would be on her own, she would be fine. She would do nothing, but she was quite calm. She would just, as you saw her sort of sitting there just staring at a book, she ignored everyone. She didn't respond. As soon as the adult tried to get any response, she would go into screaming rages. And she was not high functioning, but she did have language. She had some words. So I thought that once we got behavioral control, we could go for spoken language, and we did. Now, what the key to all the children is getting behavioral control, because if you do not have the behavioral control, you cannot do any of the teaching. I have seen children, and I'll show next week some writing of a 10-year-old child who's called nonverbal. When I met him, he was 9. It's about a year and a half. And when I met him, he was in ABA for hours a day where he did nothing. His ABA program couldn't move him because he was very resistant, so he never passed criterion. So he was at a curriculum for a 1.5 to 2-year-old child. When he wasn't in the ABA program, all he did was stand at a door and move it back and forth. And I had no idea, which I often don't, if I could make any progress with him. Within a year, he reached 3rd grade academic achievement. And I couldn't predict it. So I think if you have the child responding to you, and if you don't overstress them, and you carefully pace the work, it can be amazing what these children achieve.
Wow. Okay, is there an age cap for kids participating in the program, would you say?
Okay, there is no age cap. It's wonderful if we can start under 6 years of age. In the developmental literature, the 2 to 6 year period was critical for Piaget, it was critical for Freud. It's a very powerful period of learning. And so you can make enormous inroads very quickly. But you can do it after. The thing is, if a child is 10 years of age and massively resistant, and you can't do anything to really change that resistance, and resistance isn't discussed enough in the field. If you can't, then it's going to be very hard to move them. But I've moved children who are started at 14, 15 years of age. It's harder. It's not as fast, but you can do tremendous things even at that age. The whole thing is, if the child at 14 says, I don't care, I'm not doing it, you're not going to do it. So you've got to be able to set things up that you gain the child's trust, and he's saying, it's worth it, I'm going to give it a try. I mean, that's my language. The child doesn't say those things.
Okay. What techniques do you recommend to improve sequencing capability, and what techniques for increasing length of sentences?
Oh, it's all in the material.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you, and the material, occasionally things get stymied and people will write in questions, and I'll give suggestions as to what to do. For example, I had one boy who was stuck for several weeks, and our programs move very fast, but he was stuck for several weeks. He couldn't get past 4-word sentences. People don't think it, in terms of linguistics, you don't think that way, but it's very helpful from day to day, on a day-to-day setting, to think that way. Anyway, what I did was write out a 5-word sentence, because he was now able to read and write. I wrote a 5-word sentence. He looked at it. I took it away and I said, what is it? And you could see him close his eyes and image the sentence, and he was able to reproduce the 5 words. That was like a quantum leap, and then we got him past it. So we do hit obstacles. We usually can get past it, but most of the program is designed to prevent the obstacles. So for example, if you want a child to go from 2-word imitations to 3, you might say whatever is in the book. Let's say you were at a girl, and now it's a girl sits. And what you can do, you might have to do 15, 20 trials of that, but you just persist. Then what's really important is, if the child gives in because they've really worked hard, you immediately lower the material to something they can do easily. So in other words, just the opposite of what happens in ABA, where they say, oh, he did it, let's make him do it again. If a child does something really hard, I say, he did it. He doesn't have to do it again. Let him go now and relax. So all that kind of instruction is built into the program.
Wow. Okay. What do you recommend if a child speaks with approximations only? He can't imitate correct pronunciations of words.
Okay, well, that's where you'd have to go to speaking sounds and see, well, first of all, he's got to have 6 different phonemes to begin with. They can't, if his approximation of boy is buh, that won't work. That's not a sufficient approximation. So it depends what you mean by approximation. But if he can actually produce a phoneme, which for everyday purposes, let's say it's a consonant vowel, like up, or let's say it's a consonant vowel might be ma, or a vowel consonant like up, okay? He's got to be able to produce both those sounds to be considered that he's producing the phoneme. And I'm being a little bit loose here with terminology, but for everyday practical purposes, it's helpful. So if his approximations are not vowel consonant and consonant vowel, it's unlikely that you'll be able to move into speaking sounds, but you might in a few months. But I do not think I have seen children be allowed to do approximations for 3 and 4 years. And that is, in my view, a very dangerous path, because it doesn't help the language. It teaches the child that he really can't do it, and it keeps him in a very defeated situation that is not helpful. there you can move so much faster in reading and teach real language, and that's the route I would go.
Okay. What is your opinion about augmentation communication devices?
That's, again, a very good question. In certain cases, they're extremely useful, particularly children who are not on the autism spectrum. For example, I have seen augmentative devices used beautifully with children with cerebral palsy. These children are desperate to communicate, and they use the augmentative device very productively for real language. Personally, and if some of the attendees really have different experience, I'd like to hear it. I have never seen augmentative devices used with children with autism other than request language, I want. In my view, that's a very dangerous way to use the language. Some people think it's very helpful, but basically what you're doing is setting up a contract with the child. If he says, I want, you give him what he wants. And then as he gets bigger and stronger and he requests other things and you don't give it, the children go into rage fits. So I have never seen augmentative devices used with autistic children for anything other than I want. And I don't think that's a good way to use it, but people may and do disagree with me on that.
Have you heard about visual immersion system? You ever heard of that?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
Perhaps the person could explain it, but.
Someone again asked, I think, of the children we showed in the videos, are they high functioning? And I think we already talked about Diane. What about the boy?
The boy was very low functioning.
Oh, he was. Okay.
Very low, very serious brain damage in addition to autism. And even when he learned to speak, and he's a very cute little boy. Well, now he's a big boy. But his speech was never really smooth. It was good, but he couldn't speak rapidly and smoothly because he had motor problems preventing it. But he was very low functioning and did amazingly well. And the mother was a spectacular teacher.
Okay.
It was very good.
Okay.
And no, most of our children are not high functioning.
Okay, my daughter, who is starting to speak, is taking to sign language. She seems to comprehend when I use signs for a verb and a noun, like go play. And I'm just learning sign language. Should I fully learn sign language so I can teach good sentence structure as well?
Well, if the child has the potential, see, I like to stick with English. That's the system that we're living in. I have found, and this will be a choice of the parents, I have found that if a child can't speak easily, we can get tremendous amounts of language through reading, which gives them access to our written language system, which gives them access to our schools, which gives them access to the communication that most of the population use. If the parent is willing to learn sign and learns it as a full system, it's a way to go. But that will mean, generally, that the only one the child can communicate with is the parent. And so that I see as a restriction. But it's great to get a full language system in, so it's worth going that route. But it is very hard to use sign language on a systematic, continuing, steady basis. Now, you see, it's very different when you're using it for a simple command like go play, because that really, you could just say play and you'll get the same result. You have used a noun and a verb. Well, it's not quite. You really use two verbs. But to really teach sentence structure requires a whole range of skills that are way beyond the kind of simple commands of everyday life, like come to eat, go get your pajamas, let's have a bath. It's fine to use that language, but it's not going to teach the child language. It'll teach children who are neurotypical, because they take what you give them and run with it. But if a child has a language problem, that everyday language, which is fine to use, doesn't really teach language.
Okay. Okay, so let's see, there's so many questions. In speaking sounds, what exactly counts as a sound? Do the sounds have to be a certain length, clarity, or volume?
Those are all very good questions. I said, it's basically going to be that it's a consonant. Well, let me, in case, vowels are just your open mouth sounds. In letters, they're called A, E, I, O, and U. But basically, a vowel is A, E, I, O. And a consonant uses the lips and the tongue and so on, like M or T or B and so on. So what you have to have for the sounds I'm talking about for speaking, you've got to have a consonant, which if you want to, you can think in terms of letters, but it's not great to think that way. So it can be M or T or B or whatever. And a vowel. So it could be ma. Okay. Now, the one thing that I'll mention here, which is not discussed at all in speech pathology, is that we use prolonged vowels. And you saw it with the little boy doing E, because what happens is, if you don't use the prolonged vowel, when we start moving into more sequences of sounds and into real speech, it gets very mumbled and garbled. So you, but if you really teach the child to use a prolonged vowel, they can start using words in a much clearer, more distinct manner. So so at first it sounds a little strange, but it's like, I like to go. That isn't exactly what we do, but you get the idea. If the child, for the teaching system, it's vital that the child do prolonged vowels. But aside from that, it's all in the book. It tells you what we do is we pick out the sounds the child can produce. So I can't make it a computer program because each child produces different sounds. But as long as they have about 6 different sounds, you can move them, and then you can move them into the sounds that they don't make. So I hope that answers it.
We have more questions than we're going to have time for, but I just copied the questions so we can make sure that we get to them.
Great.
Maybe in the last segment where we do a Q&A.
Yeah.
I'm going to lose these questions. And let's see. Yes, Christina, this is an online program you can use at home. It's right here. You can learn more about it, and you can read Spectacular Bond as well. Let's see, I'm just trying to see if there's something a little different. My son is 7 and he has trouble keeping up with conversation. Is there a program in ASD that I could use to help him focus on conversation?
Well, I'd need to know much more. Okay. But it takes a lot of skill to keep up with a conversation.
Yeah.
And basically, if he's willing to stay around and listen to the conversation, that should be sufficient. You shouldn't pressure the child to engage in conversation. One of the things that I have found, and I haven't made it into a program yet, is I use email to teach conversation, because what it does is, and I have very special techniques for it, but what you do in emails, you have enough time, and these children need time to come up with responses so that they can really engage in a conversation. But real spoken conversation is enormously rapid, enormously varied. It just is so hard to keep track of it. So you can develop conversational skills through the writing more effectively than you can through speaking. But if a child is willing to sit and be with people who are conversing, that's a great thing just on itself. And the child should be put under no pressure to contribute to the conversation.
Okay. My 9-year-old son asked for his basic needs in 3 or 4 words. He still uses echolalia when asked a question. There is no conversational speech. Does this program help with that?
It should help with that.
Right.
Echolalia, from a conversational point of view, is kind of, well, what's the point? But echolalia from a language point of view is excellent. It means he's processing language. So once you use the echolalia to develop the imitation skills of well-formulated sentences and then teach him how to answer questions, you're well on your way towards changing the pattern that you're describing. But again, if you know that the child, if the echoing is coming because he's being asked questions, the first thing that the parent should do is to stop asking questions, which I'll discuss next time, or I'll discuss in the 4th session. But asking questions that do not elicit correct answers is a very counterproductive procedure. It's hard for people to see that because they've been told questions are so great and that they get children to think and so on. But questions, if you can't answer them, just teach you failure.
Okay. Is this webinar about the ASD learning program, or is there another specific program for speech and language?
There's no ASD learning. There's an ASD reading site, which has a lot of my programs. And all the programs contribute to different aspects of learning. So Unlocking Language, which is a paper and pencil program, teaches the language skills and the question asking and the question answering skills that I was describing. Speaking Sounds teaches the child how to speak. Now, if a child isn't speaking, you shouldn't be doing Unlocking Language, you should be doing Speaking Sounds. But you could be doing ASD reading at the same time, so that you're getting the child into language and into written language, which is very effective, but you're not making demands on spoken language until the child's ready for spoken language.
Okay. You know, we've really gotten to the hour, and I'm going to ask you maybe 2 more questions. We won't get to everything this time, but I just want to remind everybody, next week we will be talking about reading. The week after, we're going to be talking about behavior, and then the week after that it will be an open Q&A. So, and I am keeping everybody's questions, and some of them we'll get to specifically in the last session, or you can come and ask your questions as well again.
One of the things I'd like to suggest is that it's just very helpful if parents will make a video. They don't have to show it to anyone but themselves. A video of their interactions with their child, and see the number of times they're asking questions that the child is not responding. See the number of times they're making requests and the child is not responding, or you need to make the request 5 or 6 times. And so it's very helpful if you make a video and then sit, maybe with your partner, maybe with a friend, maybe with a relative, and just analyze it, and so that it gives you a chance to see really how your child's interacting in a way that you don't see when you're involved in the interaction. So that's an extremely helpful thing to do.
You should have someone else make the video?
No, well, however you make it. If you have a little camera, you can't do it with your phone while you're talking to the child, unless you're doing it of him talking to someone else. But you want to have, sometimes parents put a little camera on a table and just record a lunch session, or a play session, or a getting dressed session. And you just look at them and say, what's happening? Is he really attending to me? Is he responding to what I'm asking? Am I asking a lot of questions that are way over his head? Things of that sort. It's very helpful if you can begin to see what your interaction is like. And it's, I just think it's very informative.
Okay. Someone's asking about the behavior program, and we're going to get to that, not next week, but the week after.
Yeah.
Someone asked, what is the highest reading level you've been able to achieve with a high functioning ASD child?
That's really for next week. The big issue in reading is comprehension, and I have very specialized techniques. I've gotten several kids through college. Teaching comprehension is really the key. It's really easy to teach the writing and the spelling, the decoding. These kids are much better at it generally than neurotypical. but their comprehension is very weak. So it's the degree to which you can improve the comprehension. And there's no limit. It depends on what the child can event. I mean, you keep trying and seeing how far you can go.
Okay. Someone asked if ASD reading is included in Testing Mom membership, and the answer is no. This is a separate program that you would sign up for yourself separately. It's Dr. Blank's program. I'll just, let's see, so many questions. Oh my gosh. Let's see. What program part of this teaches language specifically, or do you use the reading program to teach language?
What? No, the chart I showed you teaches language. In other words,
this one. This one?
This one, yeah. So for example,
okay.
I'll give you a sample. What happens is the language is set up. It's not totally, quotes, normal language, but it's set up that it sounds an awful lot like normal language. So that you can see, for example, you say to the child, get the boy. You have some toys. So he's doing receptive, he gets the boy. And you could say something like, what other, let's say he's through the program, what other kids, what other things were near the boy? And he'll say, the dogs were near the boy. And then you say, fine, bring over one of the dogs. And you can say, now make the boy walk with the dog. And you could sort of say something like, was there a girl with the boy? No, there was no girl with the boy. So in other words, you can get a very rich dialogue, which is designed to sound like normal language and helps the child generalize to everyday language. So if you're in the supermarket, you say, what things are over there? And he says, the fruits are over there. Okay, I'd like you to get me 4 pears and a bunch of bananas. And he does it. And then you sort of, you can say things like, did you get any oranges? No, I didn't get any oranges. Okay, but we don't want any oranges now. So let's go down another count. In other words, ASD Unlocking Language is designed to teach the language of communication, the language we speak. Now, the same thing can be done with reading. If a child is quotes, nonverbal, which I don't like the term, you can do it just totally with reading. But if a child is verbal, you can do it so he ends up with a good speaking system and a good writing system, a written language system.
All right, so I'm going to ask you, one person asked if they could see this recording later. Yes, it will be at testingmom.com/classes tomorrow. And I'm going to ask you one last question.
Sure.
Okay, and then we'll have to get the rest of the questions next week and the weekend.
Okay.
If continuing to ask questions leads a child to feeling like a failure, how do you teach a child to answer questions appropriately?
Well, I thought I covered that, which is, I thought I covered it, which is once the child is able to imitate fairly long sentences, and all the sentences are set up for you, you don't have to figure them out. Mm-hmm. You know, the sentences like, all the things on the table are animals, and things of that. And then you teach them how to answer questions about it, because you teach them, and there is a clear answer. That's how we do it. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. Now, we also do that in ASD reading so that we teach children how to answer questions. Answering questions is a very vital skill, but we don't just pound the child with questions, and we intermix commands and statements and questions, and it's about the same language that we use in everyday life, so they have a chance to generalize. And that's what you saw when, for example, Diane, when she was about 9, and she says, I am making a blue sky. Well, those are the language forms we taught her. Mm-hmm. But we didn't teach her to say, I am making a blue sky, but we taught her how to use I. Remember I said we teach I and you as an exception. We taught her verbs like make. We taught her how to describe things she sees, and she was able to construct sentences that way. So we put in the elements that a child needs to be able to start producing language effectively.
Got it. All right.
I hope that
So-
answers it.
Yeah.
I feel a little strange that they thought we weren't teaching language.
No, I get it. I see that we are, but it's, yeah, so it's a whole system, really. It's
Yeah.
yeah. So, all right. So, if you'd like to watch this again, as I said, go to testingmom.com/classes. It'll be up tomorrow.
And also, they can watch a lot of the videos on
Yes.
ASD reading,
Mhm. Right
showing
there.
you several children doing different aspects of the different language programs. So that's a
Right.
good way to coordinate those two.
Right, right. So come here to asdreading.com and you'll be able to see a number of different videos. It looks like, oh, look, lots
Yeah,
of
there.
videos. There you go. So you can see a lot of different videos. You can see teachers talking about the program. You can just learn a lot more about it, I think, right here. I think this is a good place.
Exactly.
To learn
That's
it.
exactly it. Yeah.
Great idea. So we recommend that. And next week, we're going to be, as we said, talking about reading. The week after, we're going to be talking about behavior. And the week after, it will be a Q&A. So, we're trying to kind of cover the whole picture here with all of these workshops. And we appreciate you staying with us longer tonight. We did go a little long. But thank you for hanging in there with us. And thank you, Dr. Blank, also for hanging in there a little longer.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. It's, there's so much that can be achieved with the children. And the thing is, it doesn't take endless amounts of time. That has been a very big error in the teaching of the children. And the children flourish and the families flourish when you can do this. So the potential is enormous.
Yeah, I think it's such important work, and that's why we're trying to put it out there and bring it to you so that everyone who has a child on the spectrum can know about it, can give it a try, can share it with the people they love who have children with ASD. So thank you for all the work you do and for sharing it with us tonight. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you. It's a
All
pleasure.
right. Thanks. Okay, we'll see everybody next week.
I hope so. Great.
Good night. Good night,
Good
everybody.
night.